If you ever find yourself near Windsor after midnight, don't stare too long into the trees. The oaks there are older than kings. They drink fog and keep secrets, and on some nights, the forest remembers a name: Herne. Some swear he's a huntsman, some say a poacher, others say something older, a piece of the woods that learned to walk. But everyone agrees on the first thing you notice: the antlers. Great ragged antlers, like a crown cut from the dark. Our story begins with a tree. They call it Herne's Oak. Ask 10 locals where it is and you'll get 11 answers. One oak was felled long ago and people said, that was the one. Decades later, another fell in a storm and they said, no, that was Herne's. The Crown even planted a memorial oak to stand where tradition pointed. Windsor carries more than one memory, and Herne's shadow hangs on more than one trunk. The oldest tale is this. Long ago, old enough that dates a smoke, there was a keeper of the king's deer in Windsor Forest named Herne. One winter's day, a stag charged the king. Herne leapt between them and took the gore himself. He survived barely, and that's where the story forks. Some whisper a healer, some a witch, some a bargain with the woods. But when Herne came staggering back, he was changed. Quiet, wild-eyed. And from that day on, he wore antlers bound to his brow. He hunted like no other, too well, some said. Envy has a way of sounding like concern. When bad luck came, missing venison, milk turned sour, cattle failing, the whispers turned to blame. Herne lost his post, lost his friends, lost his name. One midnight, beneath the oldest oak in the forest, with a rope and a prayer, he ended his life where he had once saved a king. They buried him quick and quiet, but the forest didn't forget. Soon people heard chains moving in the branches. Cattle panicked when there was no wolf to see. Hunters spoke of a stag shadow with a man's stride. In winter, most of all, near midnight, something walked a circle around that oak, horns black against the sky. This isn't only fireside talk. Even Shakespeare knew the rumour. In the Merry Wives of Windsor, written around 1600, a character warns of Herne the Hunter, once a keeper there, who at still midnight circles an oak, shakes a chain and frightens cattle. Shakespeare didn't invent it, he borrowed it, which means that by the late 16th century, the name already carried weight among people who knew the park's paths and its stories. In the centuries after, the tale grew antlers of its own. Victorian writers loved a good haunting and threaded Herne into long romances. The loyal keeper, the jealous rivals, the despair beneath the oak, the antlered spirit galloping through the great park. A rattling of gear, a scatter of hounds only heard, never seen. Tourists came to peer at Herne's Oak, whichever it was that year. Guides pointed out scorch marks on old bark and told of storms that shook the forest like a drum. The strangest thing about Herne is this: he doesn't only appear, he adapts. Sometimes he looks like a poacher, sometimes a king's man, sometimes more than a man, a leader of the wild hunt, that old European procession that rides the storm. He shifts to fit the fears of whoever's listening. Farmers dread him for curdled milk. Courtiers once dreaded him as an omen. Children know him as the thing you shouldn't follow when it whistles from the tree line. So does he exist? Let me give you a nightwalk story told by a keeper years back, making his rounds on a pale road in the park. Nothing moved but his breath and the small clink of a buckle at his chest. He stopped near the oldest part of the wood. No wind, no owls, just that heavy winter quiet. Then a smell, wet bark and iron. And a feeling, the kind that arrives before thought, the feeling of something large watching you. Fur rises along the arms even when you tell yourself there's nothing there. The keeper turned and saw beneath a knotted oak a shape the size and stance of a tall man. A coat, he thought, a hood. Then the curve above the head, not a branch, not a trick of the eye. Antlers catching a shred of moon. "Who goes?" the keeper called. "This is Crown land." The shape lifted something long, perhaps a staff, and the keeper heard a light metallic drag against bark. A chain pulled slow. Not a threat, not a rattle, more like a memory. The thing took one step, and every shadow along the path seemed to lean with it, as if the forest was stitched to its heels. "You're trespassing," the keeper tried again, and heard how soft his voice had become. The antlers turned. For a heartbeat that felt like falling, the keeper felt seen, like the woods themselves had leaned down until the night had weight. Cloud covered the moon. When the light returned, the shape was gone. Above him, something faint ticked against the bark, like metal cooling. He left the job in spring. Folklore scholars say Herne is a palimpsest, stories written over stories. There are older legends of the wild hunt, riders pounding across the winter sky, led by a horned figure who brings storm. There are English tales of cursed keepers, doomed huntsmen, and spirits that guard boundaries. There are also very local worries: disease in the herd, blight in the oak, fear of breaking the crown's laws, that want one name to pin them on. Herne is where those threads knot. And what of the oak? Was there truly a single Herne's oak? There was an oak once that locals pointed to with pride and dread. It came down, some say axes, some say storm. Another was adopted. That one fell in rough weather in the 19th century. The royal household planted a memorial oak where tradition said the old one stood, and later another commemorative tree appeared nearby. Walk the park today and you can still find a tree bearing the name. Take a picture if you like. The forest smiles at our signs. It knows a name isn't nailed to a trunk. It moves with the roots. There's a curious thread that runs through the old lines. Herne blasts the tree. Farmers used blast for a blight that blackened leaves after violent weather. The simplest story was that a spirit made the rounds at midnight and laid a hand on the bark. It's always the midnight and the circle with Herne. He walks the ring around the oak. Perhaps that's what a haunting is. A path paced so often by grief or guilt or rumour that the ground remembers and the air rehearses it when the season turns cold. Rangers in Windsor still keep a habit you won't find in a leaflet. If you must cut a limb from a very old oak, one that has stood through Tudors and thunderstorms, you don't do it at midnight in deep winter. You do it at noon with company and you tap the trunk and say, "Beg pardon." Call it courtesy or superstition. Old habits are how people make peace with old powers. And what of Herne the man? Maybe he was real, a loyal keeper broken by rumour and bad luck. Maybe he was only ever a whisper stitched to Windsor by a playwright with a good ear. Shakespeare gave the legend a stage, but the forest gave it a pulse. It beats whenever fog lifts off the Thames and the deer steps soft between the trees. So if you go to Windsor and you are brave or foolish, go in winter. Wait for the hour when the park is as quiet as your own breath. Find the oldest oak you can. Look for the ring of flattened earth at its feet, where the roots lift like knuckles through the soil. And if you hear chain against bark, don't talk and don't run. Listen. Every place has a guardian, and every guardian has a story, and some stories grow antlers when the night gets cold enough. That was the tale of Herne the Hunter. If you enjoyed the path we took tonight, come back next time. There are other woods, and they are generous with their ghosts.